Hello, dear story lovers. At the amount of 1,000 subscribers, I will post a huge series of special stories for you. Subscribe now. The war between Earth and the Zarlonian Empire was one of attrition, waged across light years and over decades. The Zarlonians, a technologically superior race with telepathic capabilities and a rigid caste system, considered humans little more than an annoyance, a species barely worthy of the term adversary. However, they underestimated humanity's ability to adapt, innovate, and, most importantly, survive. Major Jack Reynolds knew the stakes of the mission when he volunteered. It was a suicide run, plain and simple, but if he could gather intel on the Zarlonian mother ship the Varnaxis, the nerve center of their operations, it could turn the tide of the war. The stealth fighter he piloted, codenamed Phantom Strike, was state-of-the-art, equipped with cloaking technology and an experimental AI co-pilot named Vega. Yet even cutting-edge tech couldn't protect him when the Zarlonians deployed an energy pulse that rendered his systems inert. Vega, status report. Jack barked as alarms blared throughout the cockpit. Major Reynolds, Vega replied, her voice eerily calm despite the chaos. All systems are non-functional. Cloaking is compromised. Brace for capture. The fighter shuddered violently as a Zarlonian tractor beam locked on. Jack clenched his teeth, his mind racing. He activated the self-destruct sequence, ensuring no critical tech would fall into enemy hands. Grabbing his sidearm, he prepared to eject, but the Zarlonians were faster. The hatch was forcibly ripped open, and a suffocating light flooded the cockpit. Two towering Zarlonian guards pulled him out. Their armor shimmered like liquid silver, and their elongated, featureless faces exuded an unnatural coldness. Despite their humanoid forms, their telepathic grip froze Jack's muscles, rendering him helpless. Human, a deep, echoing voice reverberated in his mind. You are a trespasser. Your resistance is futile. Jack gritted his teeth, refusing to respond. He knew enough about Zarlonians to understand their disdain for verbal communication. Silence was his only weapon. They dragged him through endless metallic corridors, each one more alien than the last. The walls pulsed faintly, as if the ship were alive. Other prisoners, various species Jack couldn't identify, shrank back into their cells as the procession passed. The Zarlonians wanted a public display, a spectacle to remind all that defiance was met with humiliation. Eventually, they reached a large chamber. At its center was High Commander Zarlok, the Zarlonian leader responsible for orchestrating devastating strikes against Earth colonies. His presence was overwhelming, not due to his size, but the psychic weight he exuded. His pale, translucent skin shimmered under the cold, blue light, and his eyes glowed with a faint violet hue. This is the best your kind can offer? Zarlok's voice echoed telepathically, though his lips never moved. A lone warrior, easily plucked from the void? How disappointing. Jack's defiance was immediate. It only takes one of us to dismantle your entire operation, he growled, his voice cutting through the telepathic haze. You'll see. The guards reacted, their grip tightening as if to punish him, but Zarlok raised a hand. No. Let him speak. The arrogance of humans is amusing. Jack smirked, his bravado masking the growing knot of fear in his stomach. You think we're arrogant? Maybe. But we've survived everything this galaxy has thrown at us. Trust me, you're next. Zarlok's violet eyes narrowed. We shall see how long that bravado lasts. I have a fitting fate for you, human. He motioned to the guards, who dragged Jack to a platform at the far end of the chamber. It overlooked a massive, dark pit, faintly glowing with the bioluminescent hue of an alien ecosystem far below. The stench was overwhelming, a mix of sulfur, decay, and something Jack couldn't identify. This, Zarlok announced, his voice booming, is the Dragon Cell. The Drazak within is a marvel of Zarlonian bioengineering. It was designed to be a perfect predator, a weapon of terror. You will face it alone, and your screams will echo through these halls. Jack glanced at the pit, then back at Zarlok. "You're making a big mistake," he said evenly. The Zalonian guards hurled him into the pit without hesitation. Jack plummeted, the air rushing past him as he fell into the darkness. He landed hard, his Sigma force training the only thing saving him from breaking every bone in his body. The ground was damp, uneven, and covered in a strange, glowing moss. A low, guttural growl echoed through the chamber. Jack rose slowly, his eyes scanning the shadows. A massive shape emerged, a creature unlike anything he'd ever seen. Its scales shimmered with a metallic sheen, and its 6 eyes glowed like molten lava. The Drazik towered over him, its rows of razor-sharp teeth bared in an otherworldly snarl. Jack's pulse quickened, but his training kicked in. He steadied his breathing and locked eyes with the beast. This wasn't just a fight for survival, it was a test of wills. The Zalonians above watched, confident that their most feared creation would dispatch the human quickly. But as Jack took his first step toward the Drazik, his resolve unwavering, they had no idea that they had just thrown a predator into the cell with their dragon. Jack wasn't prey. He was the hunter. The air in the dragon cell was heavy and humid, the kind that clung to Jack Reynolds' skin and made every breath a reminder of where he was trapped, alone, with a monster. The glowing moss covering the cell's walls gave off a faint green light, just enough for him to see the creature emerging from the shadows. The Drazik was immense, nearly the size of a transport shuttle, its body a blend of sleek, metallic scales and thick, corded muscle. Its 6 eyes glowed with a fierce orange intensity, scanning Jack with an unnerving level of intelligence. As it moved, its claws scraped against the stone floor, the sound reverberating through the cavernous cell. Jack resisted the instinct to run. Running would only trigger its predatory instincts, and besides, there was nowhere to go. He crouched slightly, his body tense but not aggressive, and observed the beast's movements. His Sigma Force training had taught him that survival often depended on understanding his opponent, not just its strengths, but its weaknesses. The Drazik growled low, a rumble that vibrated in Jack's chest. It lowered its head, coiling its muscular body like a spring, ready to strike. Jack took a step back, careful not to appear threatening but keeping his eyes locked on the creatures. The standoff stretched, each second feeling like an eternity. Then, it lunged. Jack threw himself to the side, narrowly avoiding a swipe from the Drazik's massive claws. He rolled to his feet, heart pounding, and assessed his surroundings. The cell was large but enclosed, the walls impossibly smooth except for faint cracks in the mossy surface. There was no immediate way out, no weapons, no tools. It was just him and the beast. The Drazik turned to face him again, its movements unnervingly fluid for something so large. Its 6 eyes flickered, almost as if it was studying him, calculating its next move. Jack realized then that this wasn't just an animal. It was something more, a predator engineered to hunt intelligently. "All right, big guy," Jack muttered under his breath. "Let's see what you've got." The Drazik lunged again, but this time, Jack didn't dodge. Instead, he moved toward it, sliding under its snapping jaws and planting a swift kick against its front leg. The impact barely fazed the creature, but it stumbled slightly, surprised by the counterattack. Jack scrambled to his feet, keeping his distance but noticing something important: the Drazik wasn't invincible. Its balance was momentarily thrown, a hint of vulnerability in its otherwise fearsome design. As the Drazik turned back to him, Jack raised his hands and made himself appear as large as possible. He bellowed, a deep, guttural sound that echoed through the chamber. To his surprise, the Drazik paused. Its 6 eyes narrowed, and it let out a low, questioning growl. Jack held his ground, his heart racing. Could this thing understand some form of nonverbal communication? He remembered his Sigma Force training on alien biology and behavior, particularly the lesson that many predators interpreted posture and sound as signs of dominance. The Drazik growled again, but it didn't attack. Instead, it began to circle him, its movements slower, more deliberate. Jack matched its pace, maintaining eye contact and mirroring its movements. It was a dangerous gamble, but he needed to establish himself as more than prey. He needed the Drazik to see him as an equal, or at least, not as an easy kill. Minutes passed, and the tension in the cell grew almost unbearable. The Drazik stopped circling and let out a short, sharp roar, its 6 eyes flickering as it lowered its head slightly. Jack wasn't sure what it meant, but it didn't seem like an immediate threat. He took a cautious step forward, his hand still raised, and the Drazik didn't react aggressively. He stopped a few feet away, close enough to feel the heat radiating from the creature's massive body. Slowly, he lowered one hand, reaching toward the glowing moss on the wall. He plucked a handful and held it out, watching the Drazik's reaction. The creature tilted its head, its glowing eyes narrowing. Then, to Jack's astonishment, it lowered its massive snout and sniffed the moss before pulling back, letting out a low, almost curious rumble. Jack exhaled slowly. "You're not just a beast, are you?" he said softly. The Drazik's eyes locked onto his, and for a moment, Jack thought he saw something more than animal instinct. There was intelligence there, perhaps even a glimmer of understanding. He dropped the moss and stepped back, giving the creature space. The Drazik didn't pursue him. The Zalonians watching from above were less impressed. On the observation deck, High Commander Zarlok scowled, his telepathic voice filling the chamber. "This human delays the inevitable. Let us see how long he can last." Jack heard the echo of the Zalonian's voice in his mind, but ignored it. His focus was entirely on the Drazik. Over the next few hours, he studied the creature's behavior, noting patterns in its movements and reactions. It wasn't just intelligent, it was cautious, almost as if it were testing him as much as he was testing it. As exhaustion set in, Jack sat against the wall, his back to the glowing moss. The Drazik lay a short distance away, its massive body coiled but relaxed. They had reached an uneasy truce, a fragile peace born of mutual respect. Jack's mind raced with possibilities. If he could gain the creature's trust, maybe he could turn the tables on the Zarlonians. He didn't know how yet, but one thing was certain, the Drazik wasn't just a monster. It was his ticket to survival and maybe even escape. The hours in the dragon's cell stretched into days. Jack Reynolds lived on the edge of exhaustion, his Sigma force training the only thing keeping him alive. He shared the cavernous cell with the Drazik, now less of an enemy and more of an enigmatic presence. They weren't friends, but they weren't enemies anymore either. Jack had learned to move cautiously around the Drazik, giving it space but also observing its patterns and behavior. It was clear to him now that the creature wasn't a mindless killing machine. It was intelligent, calculating, and, most importantly, it seemed to respect him or at least tolerate him. He began testing the boundaries of their truce. One day, as the Drazik lay coiled in the center of the cell, its 6 eyes half closed, Jack approached it cautiously. He held out his hand, palm open, and spoke in a calm voice. "I don't know if you understand me, but if we're going to get out of here, we need to work together." The Drazik's eyes opened fully, glowing like molten fire. It let out a low rumble, not a growl but something softer, almost questioning. Jack took it as a good sign and continued talking, more to steady his own nerves than anything else. "You're not just a prisoner here, are you? They're afraid of you. That's why they keep you locked up." The creature didn't respond, but its gaze remained fixed on him, unblinking and intense. Jack took a step closer, his hand still extended. The Drazik sniffed the air, then lowered its massive head slightly, allowing Jack to touch the smooth, metallic scales on its snout. The surface was warm, almost alive, and Jack felt a strange connection, a moment of understanding. "You're smarter than they think," Jack said softly. "And so am I." The plan over the next few days, Jack began to explore the cell in greater detail. The walls were smooth and seamless, save for a few cracks in the moss-covered surface. The Zalonians had designed the enclosure to be inescapable, but they hadn't accounted for the combination of human ingenuity and the raw power of the Drazik. Jack started testing the walls, pressing against the cracks and steadying the structure. He discovered a section where the moss glowed faintly brighter, a sign of an energy conduit running behind the wall. If they could breach that section, it might destabilize the containment field that kept the cell sealed. The challenge was convincing the Drazik to help. Jack began training with the creature, using gestures and vocal cues to establish a rudimentary form of communication. He rewarded its cooperation with glowing moss, which he discovered the Drazik seemed to enjoy eating. Slowly, they developed a system. Jack would point to an area of the wall, and the Drazik would test it with its claws or tail, its immense strength enough to create small fractures. One night, as the cell fell into its eerie, quiet stillness, Jack made his move. He stood by the weakened section of the wall and gestured for the Drazik to join him. The creature approached, its eyes flickering with curiosity and understanding. Jack pointed to the wall, then mimicked a smashing motion with his hands. "Here," he said, his voice low but firm. "We hit here, together." The Drazik growled softly, then reared back, its massive tail coiling like a whip. With a roar, it struck the wall with incredible force. The impact echoed through the cell, sending a shower of glowing moss and debris raining down. A crack appeared, faint but visible, and a low hum filled the air as the energy conduit behind the wall flickered. Jack pressed his ear to the wall, listening. He heard the faint buzz of energy, a sign that the containment field was weakening. Again, he urged, pointing at the same spot. The Drazik didn't hesitate. It struck again, harder this time, and the wall buckled. A jagged hole appeared, revealing the glowing machinery of the energy conduit. Sparks flew as the system began to destabilize, and a warning siren blared overhead. The Zalonians react. On the observation deck, High Commander Zarlok's expression darkened as the alarms echoed through the chamber. "Impossible," he muttered, his telepathic voice tinged with disbelief. "The dragon cell is impenetrable." A subordinate approached, its telepathic aura tinged with fear. "The human and the Drazik, they are working together." Zarlok's eyes flared violet. "Fools! Deploy containment drones immediately. Do not let them escape." The final push. In the cell, Jack and the Drazik worked frantically as the walls began to give way. Jack tore at the exposed machinery, ripping out wires and components to disable the containment field. The Drazik, sensing the urgency, roared and slammed its tail into the wall one final time, shattering it completely. A rush of cool air flooded the cell as the containment field collapsed. Jack grabbed a shard of the broken wall as an improvised weapon and turned to the Drazik. "This is it," he said. "We're getting out of here." The Drazik growled in agreement, or at least, Jack chose to believe it was agreement. As the Zalonian drones swarmed into the cell, Jack and the Drazik fought side by side. The creature's claws tore through the machines like paper, while Jack used his makeshift weapon and his Sigma Force training to disable their power cores. It was a chaotic, desperate battle, but together, they managed to break through the onslaught. At last, they reached a corridor beyond the cell. Jack glanced back at the Drazik, its massive form silhouetted against the glowing wreckage of the broken containment field. "Come on, big guy," he said with a grin. "Let's show these bastards what happens when you mess with the wrong prisoners." The Drazik let out a thunderous roar, and together, they charged into the heart of the Zalonian ship, ready to turn the tables on their captors. The corridor stretched before Jack Reynolds and the Drazik, its walls alive with pulsating energy lines and the faint hum of Zalonian machinery. Behind them, alarms wailed like a chorus of dread, signaling their escape to every guard on the massive ship. But Jack felt no fear now, just resolve. The Drazik, his unlikely ally, moved beside him, its massive form casting long shadows as it let out a low, rumbling growl. The sound of Zalonian guards approaching echoed down the corridor. Jack glanced at the Drazik and gestured forward. "You take the heavy lifting, Titan," he said, using the name he'd given the creature. I'll handle the rest. Titan roared in what Jack could only interpret as agreement and charged ahead. The first wave of guards appeared around the corner, their sleek, silver armor glinting under the corridor's dim lighting. Titan didn't hesitate. With one swipe of its massive claw, it sent 2 guards flying into the wall. Their telepathic screams reverberated in Jack's mind before abruptly cutting off. Jack sprinted after Titan, his makeshift weapon ready. A Zalonian soldier raised a plasma blade, but Jack ducked under the swing, jabbing the jagged shard of metal into a gap in the alien's armor. Sparks flew as the guard crumpled, and Jack pressed forward, adrenaline driving him. Down the left passage. Jack shouted, pointing toward a sign marked with Zalonian glyphs. His time in the cell hadn't been wasted. He'd memorized every guard's route, every patrol shift he could observe, and every hint of the ship's layout. The hangar, after fighting through several more groups of guards, Jack and Titan reached their destination, the hangar bay. It was a vast expanse, filled with Zalonian ships of various sizes, from sleek fighters to massive transport vessels. Jack's eyes scanned the area until he spotted what he was looking for: a human stealth fighter, its matte black hull standing out among the alien designs. "There she is," Jack muttered, his heart skipping a beat. The Zalonians must have captured it from a previous raid, but now it would serve as their escape route. The hangar wasn't unguarded. A squad of Zalonian drones hovered near the ship, their plasma cannons glowing ominously. Jack's mind raced as he considered their options. He looked at Titan, who was already snarling at the drones. "Okay, big guy," Jack said, crouching beside the Drazek. "We need a diversion. You take out as many of those drones as you can. I'll make a run for the ship and fire up the engines." Titan roared in response and charged into the fray. The drones swarmed around the massive creature, their plasma bolts streaking through the air, but Titan's speed and strength were unmatched. It smashed 2 drones with a single swipe of its tail, then leaped onto a third, crushing it beneath its weight. Jack used the chaos to his advantage, sprinting across the hangar toward the stealth fighter. He ducked behind crates and machinery to avoid stray plasma fire, his makeshift weapon clutched tightly in his hand. When he reached the ship, he found the hatch controls locked with a Zalonian security panel. "Of course," Jack muttered, glancing over his shoulder at the ongoing battle. Titan was holding its own, but the drones were relentless. Jack needed to act fast. He pulled a small, concealed device from his boot, a Sigma Force hacking tool he'd hidden from his captors. Plugging it into the panel, he worked quickly, bypassing the Zalonian security protocols. The hatch hissed open, and Jack climbed inside, the familiar cockpit filling him with a surge of hope. "Vega, wake up," he barked, slapping the console. The AI's voice crackled to life. "Major Reynolds. It's good to see you. Shall we leave?" "Not yet," Jack said, powering up the ship's weapons. "First, we're evening the score. Turning the tables." As the ship's systems came online, Jack took control of the turret and targeted the remaining drones. With precision fire, he blasted them out of the air, clearing the way for Titan. The Drazek turned to look at him, its 6 eyes glowing with something Jack swore looked like gratitude. "Get in," Jack shouted, opening the cargo bay. Titan bounded across the hangar and leaped inside, the ship shaking slightly under its massive weight. With Titan aboard, Jack sealed the hatch and activated the engines. The stealth fighter roared to life, and Jack piloted it toward the hangar's exit. Zalonian fighters scrambled to intercept, but Jack's experience and Vega's advanced targeting algorithms made quick work of them. Plasma blasts lit up the hangar as the stealth fighter weaved through enemy fire, its cloaking system activating just as it breached the ship's outer hull. The final blow. As they escaped into the void of space, Jack activated the stealth fighter's communications array and sent a coded message to Earth Command. "This is Major Jack Reynolds. I've escaped the Zalonian mothership with critical intel. Prepare for extraction and be ready for a surprise passenger." But Jack wasn't done. He glanced at Vega's interface. Can we fire one of their own energy blasts back at them? Affirmative, Vega replied. Redirecting power to the main cannon. Jack targeted the Zalonian ship's core, a pulsating mass of energy at the heart of the vessel. With a deep breath, he pressed the trigger. The cannon fired, the blast tearing through the mothership's shields and striking the core. A chain reaction of explosions erupted, and Jack didn't wait to watch the fireworks. He pushed the engines to full throttle, putting as much distance as possible between them and the dying Zalonian ship. The aftermath. Hours later, Jack's stealth fighter docked at an Earth command station. As the hatch opened, the soldiers and scientists waiting were stunned to see the massive Drazek emerge behind Jack, its eyes scanning the room warily. Relax, Jack said, patting Titan's metallic scales. He's on our side. The Drazek let out a low growl, but it wasn't threatening. It was a sound of acknowledgement, maybe even approval. Jack grinned. We've got a lot to talk about, but first, let's make sure Earth knows how to end this war. In the weeks that followed, Jack's intel and the bond he'd forged with Titan became the turning point in humanity's fight against the Zalonians. Together, they proved that even in the darkest moments, alliances could be forged in the unlikeliest of places, and that underestimated enemies could bring down empires. Jack Reynolds and Titan weren't just survivors. They were symbols of resilience, courage, and the unyielding will to fight for freedom.